Hi guys, and welcome to another video. In today's video I want to show you a game of mine which I played in an open tournament some years ago in Germany, and my opponent was rated about 2000 FIDE, and the topic of today's game is material versus initiative and when to sacrifice a pawn for the initiative. So we will just start with the opening moves. The game starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, Spanish opening, and already here my opponent chose, kind of a sideline with g6. There are some ways to handle this with white, but I decided to build up a strong center with c3, bishop g7, normal development, pawn to d4, already now occupying the center. And the normal reaction by black would be to take and then force my bishop back and harass the bishop again later. For example here, and although white is a little better, it is playable for black, and it was played in several strong games and there is no issue. But my opponent, I don't know if he was not familiar or just mixed up the moves, he played knight e7 instead. And that's the first moment where you can pause the video and think on your own, because I think already here we have a critical decision to make, and I'm curious what you can come up with. So pause the video, think about this moment here. I think it's very crucial, and then we continue. So let's discuss some options. First, you should always consider captures, but here we cannot really win a pawn, and although this might be interesting, it's not entirely clear to me how good this is. Maybe there are some ideas with bishop h6 if you came up with something like this. This is quite interesting, but I'm not so sure if the bishop might be just forced back and then black can try to repeat the moves or organize his castling somehow. I would say this is quite a decent try, but I think there is another even more convincing option. Also here, after d takes e5, maybe black is castling first and just saying he wants to recapture later, but it's not so clear either, because white might hold on to the pawn. So yeah, d takes e5 is definitely a decent option, but maybe some of you also had the idea of pushing d5, which is also quite an aggressive move. We forcing back a already developed piece, and that's not very good for black. Yes, so black has no real choice. He could play a6, but I just retreat the bishop all the way back, and then he needs to go backwards with the knight, which is kind of sad, and which I liked even more than taking on e5. And here comes the real question, how to proceed now, and maybe some of you already had been thinking about this moment. And the move which I played was d6, and I think it's quite an interesting one. So if black takes this one, his development is quite paralyzed, and he could even think about not recapturing this pawn. So this is the first situation you should remember, because I think it's quite a recurring pattern that you give up a pawn on d6 to kind of paralyze the queen side. And as a rule of thumb, I would say you often don't need to regain the pawn, nor do you need to gain anything special, because just the fact that the pawn is doubled is just a big issue for black to solve, and even if we cannot regain it, we have a certain advantage due to our development. However, here white could just take it, and still the queen side is quite paralyzed, and black has trouble getting his pieces out. White is just maybe attacking on the king side. This is just a sample line, but the queen is pretty safely established on d6, and there is no way to get rid of it. So white is much better here, and we will see what happened in the game. So in the game, my opponent did not take on d6, but he rather wanted me to take on c7, recapture, and later continue d6 himself, developing all his pieces and finishing development. But my plan was different, so I just decided to develop further and provoke some weaknesses. So the real important thing is I don't really care much about this pawn because I'm not afraid of this extra pawn by black, because it will stay a double pawn and we will have positional counterplay for it all the time. So let's see the next move. Bishop g5, pawn to f6 and bishop to e3. So for all of you who wonder, why do I waste time putting the bishop to e3 in two moves instead of in one move? So this is what we call provoking weaknesses. In this situation, the black queen is lacking space, and so there is no real way for black to defend the queen except going f6. For all of you who wonder about bishop f6, you can try to think why this is not working and pause the video. And we will continue with the solution. White could take on c7, forking and distracting the queen because it needs to capture on c7 when the bishop on f6 stays undefended and white is winning a whole piece. So this is impossible. So black really needs to move the f-pawn, which is against a lot of opening rules, and the reason for this is that this diagonal becomes very vulnerable. So in the game I move the bishop back now, and if black is not careful, I will also drop back my bishop and prevent castling like forever, because he cannot really neutralize the bishop so easily. And in the game he indeed took on d6, which allowed me to install the bishop to c4. However, also this is not such a great fun for black. Maybe also here I just continue bishop c4 and try to open maybe the h file with h4, h5, h6, or just take, and white gets a huge attack and black is in trouble. So already here black is in trouble, and the reason for all this is that this pawn is really paralyzing his development. So let's see what happened, but from now I think you can see how the development by white is going very smoothly and how huge problems already exist from here for the black side. So pawn took and bishop went back to c4. There was another tactical solution which I did not see, which is knight a3 to answer a6 with knight c4. And after this the knight comes to d6, and probably around here I misevaluated this, that this is so powerful. For example, after king e7 there is bishop c5 and all kind of discovered attacks are threatened. For example, knight takes here, or the knight wins the queen is also a threat. So this is trouble. Maybe I was worried about something like king f8. But also here I think the initiative looks quite good. Maybe I can start with bishop to c5, and the only way to block is knight e7 and then queen b3, and it's very hard to do something, and I guess black is just lost. So this was another way to bring the knight very quickly into the game, but I decided to go bishop c4, just trying to maybe threaten some checkmate, but also just preventing castling and continue my development. So my opponent chose to play queen e7, which is a bit materialistic, keeping the pawn, but I think it's tough to suggest good moves for black here. Maybe I would try to develop my queen side like this, but somehow there are too many pieces in too little space. So after a6, maybe I'm just preventing b5, and after b6 he might get the bishop out, but he's still stuck, and in this case I also gain the pawn, and I'm not even material down and have a great position. So he played queen e7, and now knight a3 with the threat of knight b5. Now you might wonder, what is white actually doing if a6 follows? Because now the pieces are kind of stuck, And this is the second moment where you can try to test your positional understanding and find a decent or the best move for white. How would you proceed here? So the move I like best is bishop b6, because after this black is so stuck with all the pieces and I don't even see any way how he can untangle them. So after this there is no real counterplay, and yeah, white will just castle, drop the bishop back, bring the knight, and the game will be over quite soon. So I like this move a lot, because on all other moves there might be b5 and still the knight would be stuck at the rim, and black might get out a little bit more. So bishop b6 paralyzing all the black pieces is, in my opinion, quite instructive. And this was not what happened. Instead, he played bishop to f8. But this is already a bit desperate. He wants to defend this pawn, but after knight b5, I threaten also the square c7, and after knight a6, what he played, my knight will be very stable here because he will never have a6, and that's bad news. And I just continued queen e2, trying to bring the rook into the game, threatening d6 again, and my opponent went for some desperation, but yeah, the position is already lost here. So pawn d5, he takes, and yeah, he went back, and I could win the game quite nicely, and he let himself checkmate here. So the finish here is quite nice. We checkmate with a double check. But the real important thing about this game I want you to remember is how difficult it can be if we sacrifice some material. And here it's the pawn on d6. We never took it back, actually. To restrict the development and to get really active pieces, and to just ignore the material and just play with the pieces, and yeah, give you some encouragement not to be too materialistic, and also to play for the initiative sometimes. So I hope you like the video, and if so, please leave a like and a subscribe here. It really helps me a lot, and I'm really happy to see you next time. Goodbye.